Biblical Genetics, page 200, marker.
Selective breeding in the Bible? Let's talk about that. What's up guys, Genetic Geeks bringing back another what you thought you knew but didn't video. Today we're going to look at the Bible and what genetics can be found in there. You're probably thinking, Matt, what does the Bible have to do with genetics? Now just hold on, I'll get there. I just need to give you some context. So the story of Jacob and Esau is a well-known Bible story that is often taught in Sunday school or kids' church. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with the story, I shall help you out. Isaac and his wife Rebekah bore twin sons, Esau, who came first, followed by Jacob. When they were old enough, it was custom during this time for the oldest child to receive his father's blessing. Jacob felt that he deserved his father's blessing, so he tricked Isaac, who was almost completely blind, into giving Jacob his blessing. Esau found out about this and threatened to kill Jacob. Upon hearing this from his mother, Rebekah, he flees to Haran to see his uncle Laban. After Jacob arrived in Haran, he became quite fond of Laban's daughter Rachel. In exchange for his daughter, Jacob worked for Laban for 7 years, bringing him great wealth. After completing his 7 years of service, Jacob wished to be married to Rachel. So Laban held a feast, and during the evening, while everything was dark, he gave Jacob his other daughter Leah. The next morning, Jacob realized what Laban had done and was furious. Laban said that he could marry Rachel if he worked for him another 7 years. After completed 14 years of service to Laban, Jacob wanted to go back home to his family in Canaan. However, Laban was reluctant to let Jacob leave because his services brought him considerable wealth. Laban asked Jacob to name his wages and promised Jacob that he would give it to him. Now, you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with genetics? Well, here it is. Jacob was an avid shepherd, dealing with sheep for most of his life, so one would assume that he would know a thing or two about sheep. So Jacob came up with a clever plan that would allow him to go back home to Canaan, even more wealthy than before. He first began to remove every speckled and spotted sheep and black lamb, as well as every speckled and spotted goat. This seemed like a great idea with odds in Laban's favor, or so he thought. Most of the goats were black or dark brown during this time, and the sheep were nearly always white, which didn't seem to be very good for Jacob. But that didn't stop him. The plan went like this. Jacob separated his flock by a 3-day journey as to not allow his flock to breed with Laban's flock. Jacob then employed 3 different breeding techniques that proved some success, but from what we know today in genetics were just completely wrong. For the first technique, Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond trees and peeled pieces of bark off, leaving white stripes behind. He then placed the sticks in front of, as well as in the troughs. Now, the idea behind this was that the sticks were thought to have a prenatal influence on the flocks. Jacob thought that if the sheep saw the stripes on the sticks while mating, the offspring would also assume the same form. So, essentially the sheep were like, hey honey, you see those sticks? Those are some nice sticks. We should have babies that look like those sticks. And voila, speckled babies! Now, the second technique followed the same principle. But in this case, Jacob separated the flock and faced them towards the black and spotted of the flock. In Jacob's mind, he thought that the influence of the living sheep should provide an even greater influence on the outcome of the offspring. It probably went something like this. Hey honey, I want to have kids like our neighbors. They seem like great kids. Get it? Kids as in baby goats? Never mind. The third technique that Jacob employed is known today as selective breeding. Lambing takes place twice per year, once in the spring and once in the fall. The offspring born in the fall were thought to be stronger than the offspring born in the spring because they must survive the winter. Jacob would selectively breed the stronger members of the flock by placing the striped sticks in their troughs, as well as to encourage them to mate and produce more striped and speckled offspring that were also strong. As for the weaker members of the flock, Jacob did not place the striped sticks in their troughs. The offspring of the weaker members of the flock would then go to Laban, and Jacob would keep the stronger. Jacob, although not a scientist, demonstrated deductive reasoning and thought about certain outcomes within his flock. He manipulated variables and made observations just as modern-day scientists do today. Even though his techniques were nowhere close to being correct, his his methodology proved to be a stroke of genius. So now you know, genetics can be found in the Bible. Religion and science are not so unrelated, and ultimately, Jacob was performing the scientific method that would not be laid out until centuries after he made this deal with Laban. You may have gotten it wrong, Jacob, but you're showing that heredity has to do with breeding.